Hi, Lois.
Hi.
I think you can turn on your
Yes. We're just about ready to begin. We'll just wait a couple more minutes for a few more participants. Okay, I think we'll get started. Hello, and welcome to the fourth and final Q&A session in our series, Surviving and Thriving Through COVID-19, Connection is the Key. I'm Lois Saunders from ASCY, and I'm so pleased to be co-hosting tonight's conversation with Dr. Jean Clinton. Just before I begin, I'll refresh you on a bit of housekeeping for using this Zoom webinar. You'll see a menu if you touch your screen. It's usually along the bottom, but it depends what device you're using. And you'll see both a chat box and a Q&A box. So in the chat box, that's where you can converse with either ourselves as panelists or everyone else who's attending and share your comments. Specific questions that you'd like to raise for our conversation, please enter those in the box that says Q&A, and I'll be monitoring those and bringing them forward in my conversation with Jean. Some people put them in the chat, but then I'm apt to miss them because it goes pretty quickly because we're a chatty bunch in early childhood education. So please try to remember to use Q&A. So let's get started. As I said, I'm very pleased to be co-hosting this session with Dr. Jean Clinton. Dr. Jean Clinton is a clinical professor, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences at McMaster in the Division of Child Psychiatry. She has been a consultant to children and youth mental health programs, child welfare, and primary care for over 30 years. Dr. Clinton is renowned nationally and internationally as an advocate for children's issues. Her special interest lies in brain development and the crucial role relationships and connectedness play therein. Jean champions the development of a national, comprehensive child well-being strategy, including a system of early learning and care for all young children and their families. She's equally committed to ensuring that children and youth's needs and voices are heard and respected. So welcome, Jean.
Hi, Lois. Good to be with you again.
It's always great to be with you, and I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation. Now, I think Paula is going to run a quick poll for us so we can see whether our participants have had a chance to preview the video that we posted. I see there's a question about where are the videos posted and the recordings. So you can find those on Dr. Jean Clinton's YouTube channel and also on the newly launched ASCY, Hamilton YouTube channel. We just launched it last week. And so this is the first collection that appears there, and there's a couple of other things there as well. Okay, it looks like most of our participants previewed the video, and that's okay. I know I talk a lot, so it it was a bit longer, but I hope you'll enjoy it if you haven't had an opportunity to see it as yet. So Jean, could you just give people a really quick recap of elements of our discussion in Module 4? And then if you'd like to move into speaking a bit more about well-being, as I was rewatching the segment, or preparing for tonight, I rewatched your segment from New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. And the well-being one really struck a chord with me. In our session 4, a videotaped conversation, we talked a bit about how does learning happen, and particularly focused on the foundations of belonging and engagement, but we really skipped quite lightly over well-being. So so if you'd like to dig in there to begin our conversation,
Sure.
it would be really helpful. Thanks.
Great. All right. Well, it's great to be here again with you, Lois, and welcome everybody. I look forward to our conversation. So make sure you put in your questions in that Q&A box. So it's terrific. I see that a large proportion of you have seen the video, but not all of you. So let me just quickly tell you some of the key points that we talked about. So we talked about resiliency, and what does resiliency mean? And you know, that is the ability to bounce back after negative experiences and be better off than you were. So it's about more than just coping and hanging in. It really is about doing better after the fact. And so we talked about that, and what are some of the dispositions of being resilient. So we talked that it's not a genetic trait. You're not either resilient or you're not, but that your mindset has a whole lot to do with whether you can view your environment and the resources that you have available to you in a positive light. So what we know from Michael Unger is that resilience really is about being able, when there's challenging times, to access resources around you, whether that's other people, positive relationships, having a sense of humor, having routines and predictability. So being able to navigate to those resources and be able to use them well. And so we talked about, if you have a mindset that says, oh, well, you know, this sucks, nothing's going to get better, nothing's going to be the same, I'm not going to be able to deal with it, then very obviously you're not going to be able to access resources in the same kind of way as if you have a mindset, a growth mindset that says, well, you know, these are challenging times, but we're going to be able to cope with them. I'm going to reach out to my co-workers, even though we're not working together. I'm going to reach out and make connection with my families to build a new way of interacting. So we talked about that resilience and the adaptability, and that when you change your mindset, you change your, you know, I think I learned it first from you, Lois, that your attitude determines your altitude. And so it has a huge impact on that. We also talked about what educators are missing most right now, and a huge part of it is belonging to, you know, connecting to each other, seeing each other, having positive relationships with each other, and the routines and predictability of daily life, which are huge in helping us cope with hard times. And then we talked a bit about the how does learning happen, and how this renewed sense of connection and belonging that you're experiencing can really enliven the four frames, you know, of belonging, well-being, expression, and experiences. It can really, this lived experience that you've had can infuse the work that you do in a more meaningful way. So, for example, I think we talked about the morning circle. And the morning circle can be viewed more than just a checking in and seeing who's there, to much more of a connecting. How are you? What have you done that was exciting? So there were lots of different things. So it's really worth a listen to. There's lots of wisdom from Lois and what she's been learning from all of you through this. So that's a summary. I think of the videos. Anything else that you would add, Lois, before I talk about well-being?
I think I think that pretty much covers it. That's my recall. So again, encourage people to have a look, and so let's dig in a bit with well-being.
Yeah. So I have, as some of you may know, I have the pleasure of working with an educational guru, Michael Fullen. He and I were advisors to the last premier, and he has a system of framework for learning called New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. And his hypothesis is that education should be all about being good at life as well as good at learning. And that what we really need to be thinking about is integrating academics with a well-being framework and strategy. So I've been thinking a lot with Michael about why should we care about well-being in education? And there's a couple of important things to be thinking about. And one is has to do with the stress in the brain. So, you know, stress is good for us. We've got stressors all of the time. You know, when we're hot, we're cold, we're hungry, we're exhausted. They're body stressors. Our system gets turned on. But when there are overwhelming or overpowering stressors, what we know is our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex, is not as much online as our fight and flight, protect yourself, watch out for threats in the environment. The limbic system, or as Stuart Shanker in his self-reg work, which I love, talks about the red brain. So what we know is the stressed brain cannot learn. The stressed brain cannot learn. And that leads us to realize that there's another neuroscientist called Mary Helen Immordino-Yang, and she tells us that you don't really learn anything of significance if you don't have an emotional connection to it. So here we've got, you can't learn if you have a stressed brain. You need an emotional connection if you are going to learn. And so that means that we have to become more expert in learning about our emotions and our stress reactions. And that means that we need to learn and help our kids learn to see, well, what kind of state am I in right now? Am I in like I am now, I'm in an excited, but I'm calm and I'm in an alert state. But, you know, the other night I was on doing a webinar, and one of the hosts, her fire alarm in her house was going off. So she went from that calm, alert state to being a little more vigilant and, you know, not taking everything in the same kind of way. So we learn based on our kind of state. So many of you have heard me talk about what you think affects how you feel, affects how you act. But when it comes to well-being and learning, what you feel is also going to be determining what you think and how you act, right? So that state dependence, what is your state? So all of this I wrap up in thinking about the First Nations mental well-being continuum. And the kind of definition of well-being that really resonates for me is, one, having a balance between your mental, spiritual, physical, cognitive, and that spiritual being, but also having a sense of meaning, having a sense of purpose, having a sense of hope and belonging in your life. When you have that, when we create that for our kids, then we have more well-being, then we have our limbic system or our red brain quieter, then we have our emotions more on and ready for the great learning that's about to come. So that was a lot of talking there, but did it make sense?
It makes so much sense. And I can see it's got a lot of people thinking, because our question box is getting populated here. So just to extend, I believe you mentioned Carol Dweck's work. And one of our questions is, can you tell us more about that? And perhaps I could ask one of my ASCY participants to do a little search and enter in the chat box the name of Carol Dweck's work and how you spell her name. That'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So the work of Carol Dweck, and it's D-W-E-C-K, she wrote a book called Mindset, but it was based on her many, many years of studying failure, how kids managed and dealt with failure. And one of her grad students said, you know, we're talking about failure, but there's a whole bunch of kids here that when they fail, what they say is, oh, that was really neat to learn about. I wonder what I can do to learn more about it. And so she kind of switched stride to say, I want to see, is there a difference in the brains of these kids in their thinking about things, and adults? And so what she talked and learned was that some people have a fixed mindset. I am as smart as I am. I'm not going to get any smarter. These kids come from this area. They're only going to be able to do so much. So they've got a fixed kind of, you know, the intelligence is fixed. I can't change very much. So that's called a fixed mindset. But what she saw was that the people who thrive in life are those who have a growth mindset, who when they fail, you know, the people with a fixed mindset says, this is too hard, I'm not doing it. The people with a growth mindset say, oh, what did I learn from this? What can I do differently? So the growth mindset really is about being more masterful, more creating more meaning in your life by examining your mistakes and recognizing that we learn from our mistakes, not just by having them, but examining them. So that's the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And the great news is that you can, once you become aware of it, you can shift your thinking to be more of a growth mindset kind of person.
Oh, that's awesome. And that leads into a next question strand is about mindsets. So, and I was thinking as I prepared in your tape discussions, a couple of them, you've used the Louis Pasteur quote, chance favors the prepared mind. So can you help us to see how we can apply this idea to our practice? Also in terms of mindsets, I'm wondering about the contagion effect, where a mindset for pessimism catches on and is conveyed to the children through our actions or tone or whatever.
Yeah. So so let me start with the second one about the kind of contagion effect. What we know is that emotions are contagious. That emotions. So when you have a fixed mindset, you are more prone to have negativity. And, you know, we can all think of colleagues or friends that we have who are just like mini Eeyores, you know, nothing's going to work. This bat cave experience is going to suck. You know, all of the Play-Doh is going to be dried out. You know, you can picture somebody who's like that. Well, that we know that we read the emotions of others. You know, there are areas of our brain that are finely attuned to picking that up. So what I talk about when I'm talking with educators is the fact that the educator creates the weather in the classroom. And if that weather is stormy and up, you know, a negative, that has a contagious effect in the emotions, and you know this better than I do because you work with kids all of the time. So we need to be, and now it doesn't mean, so one, we need to be aware of our emotional state, you know, that state dependence. What is our emotional state? Now, it doesn't mean to say that we have to be, oh, you know, Polly pretty and happy all the time. Not at all. We need to be aware of it and recognize that how we feel is going to affect how others feel, and be the boss as much as you can of that. So, you know, thinking then of, I need to be a self-reflective practitioner, I need to better understand my mindset. And so the phrase that I heard before and have mentioned a couple of times about the chance favors the prepared mind. What does that mean? It means that you're going to make discoveries about kids. you're going to see how wonderful and the great potential they have if you already have a mindset that says they come competent and capable. It's not what I have to teach them that is going to help them grow, but it is my recognition that they have something to contribute, and that my role is to be an observer and a learner of how is it that they learn. When you have that mindset, then by chance, you're going to be able to see this kid who has a lot of prior knowledge that you had no clue about. Kids coming from disadvantage. Chance favors the prepared mind. If we think through a deficit lens that we have to catch them up with what we know is important, like numeracy and literacy, then we completely miss the competence that they have created to be who they are at that point in time. So that's how I tie them in. And I love How Does Learning Happen? Because it really says, let's create the stage where we are more likely to see that potential in kids. Did that make a sequence of thoughts?
Yes, yes, a lot of thoughts. And I think it's important for us to hear this as we start to think about the children who we will be so happy to see again when programs resume in a few weeks or a month from now, or whenever that happens. Now, in one of your segments, you spoke of leadership as a key to navigating this pandemic. Now, this week we met with our child care and early years program leaders at our supervisors learning community, our virtual supervisors learning community. And an ask from this group was for resources and guidance for supporting their teams. Some of their staff may not agree with the decision to resume programs, or they may be really feeling anxious about the burden of responsibility for prevention. And some may be returning to work on empty in terms of their own well-being. Of course, this could be equally true for many parents who are having to, enter into the workplace again and take their children to childcare, and they're doing so with mixed feelings. So, any resources or guidance that you'd have for leaders?
Right. Well, I think that the idea of leadership in troubling times is so important to think about, and leaders have to be leading by example and by humility in my experience. A resource for people who are in leadership positions, there's a great resource from CASEL, C-A-S-E-L. They're absolutely, so that's the one of the main areas, main groups who are looking at social and emotional learning, which is crucial in these times. So I would, as a leader, if I were in the position in childcare, I would first of all be thinking about filling the buckets of the staff, that emotional recharge that they need. So when we think about belonging and well-being and experience and expression in kids, I think that the first job of educators now, before returning to school, to practice, is to be building that now. So to be reaching out to staff, to have them connect in, to have them really have discussions about what their needs, values, goals, and strengths are all about, like my friend Stephen de Groot talks about, the core four. And so really, as leaders, to be thinking about that, what do I need to do to have conversations, to start the conversations with my staff who are reluctant, rather than saying, okay, you don't have to, or you say, that's it for you. You open the door to say, okay, tell me, why is that important to you? What difference would that make? What is it that you need that decision is going to help? Because when leaders really create that sense of safety that we can have these conversations, then it leads staff to be able to really examine what it is that's going on in their lives and in their head. And then they can come to consensus about, well, how do we do this? Do we make sure that we're screening parents as they come in and screening kids when they come in? Are we going to make sure that each of us are screened ourselves with COVID testing? And you listen to public health, of course, but you also take the temperature of your own staff and make staff well-being a priority so that they're better able to meet the needs of the kids.
Well, thanks, Jean. I think that's a good reminder. I mean, it's, as we said in our video, and we know based on documents that are being posted for our sector that policy and protocol is going to be really big. And so leaders will absolutely make sure they've got the policy protocol in place and working well with public health. But this other aspect of reaching out to staff and helping to fill their buckets and fill their well before they return to the workplace, and really listening and hearing and appreciating what they're thinking and engaging them in thinking about the possibilities as opposed to the impossibilities.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's really important to recognize that nobody in the world knows how to do this perfectly.
Good point.
So, be ready to make mistakes, be ready to learn from those mistakes. And I see this, as we talked about, Lois, as a time for really building terrific connections with parents in a way that people have longed for a long time. You know, and I think leadership can absolutely facilitate that.
Right. Which brings us to a next question. In our video, we talked about thinking about parents as allies, and that notion of it takes a village to raise a child. So can you talk more about connecting not only the educators and families, but parents to parents and children to each other during this time at home?
Yeah.
And
sorry.
How beneficial is this connection to belonging, well-being, mental health, and learning?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that parents will have experienced a major eye-opener in being home with their little kids all of the time, having to juggle life, family, work. I think that parents are going to have developed a much deeper appreciation of what it is that early childhood educators do. That it is not just about babysitting, that tossing something at a kid and hoping that they're occupied for several hours, but recognizing that toddlers are interfering with your plan so many times a second. So I'm very hopeful that there will be a deeper appreciation of the work of education and care for our youngest citizens. And so I think it's really an important time for centers to be reaching out to parents. One, to say, how's it going? We know this is tough work. We're trained to do it. We're the pros in it. How is it going for you? And share some suggestions or hear their stories, or sometimes just listen. And then I think the other thing about parents as allies is, let's see if we can't get them on the front lines along with all of us to say early childhood education and care is an essential service. It should not be left to the whim of this government or that government, but we absolutely need to see a universal plan for high quality, equitable care for our youngest children. So I'm hoping that through the experience now, that we'll have more recognition about it, as well realizing that it's more than just looking after kids for the support to employment. It really does have to do with children's development. That's
right. Yes, absolutely. Now, in terms of connecting with families ahead of time, one of the questions that's come up is about engaging with, or how to connect with families who don't seem to be engaging with the online connections as much or in the same way as other families. In one of your segments, you spoke about the dose effect of small daily connections. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit and we could talk about ways to engage families.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been listening to Dr. Bruce Perry a lot over this period of time, and he has if you Google Dr. Bruce Perry, Perry, COVID, you'll see that he's done a whole series of sessions with his community, and then does little videos. So what he talks about is the huge importance of brief contact, just a relational hit that says, hi there, I'm thinking about you, how's it going, can't wait to see you again. Now, it does not have to be every day, that's for sure, especially with everything else that we're doing, we can't do that. But if you can do that a couple of times a week, or with some families once a week, we know that what families have access to in terms of internet and in terms of joining in is a very complicated story. We don't know why it is that some families aren't joining in, but what we do know is that if we're kind, we're far more likely to reach them. And so you don't judge that they're not joining in and doing their work or whatever it is they're supposed to be doing, but you find out what are the ways that I can reach out, let you know that I care and that I want to connect. And sometimes it is just that text, it's just that phone call, and it doesn't have to be this prolonged experience of 50 minutes or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even the small things will make a difference. I want to share with you and our participants some of the ideas that and strategies that we've learned of from others. We learned about educators doing a drive-by to their children's homes, to letting parents know they're coming, or waving from the sidewalk, things like that. We've seen a couple of Hamilton programs have posted photographs of the playground, the children's classrooms, elements in the preschool, or they're reading their favorite books on an online format for the children. But just I thought the idea of sending the familiar pictures, remember our school and we're waiting for you to come back to it, it was a really, really nice touch. And I heard of a program where the educators were actually making a phone call to the home, every now and then to homes, just to say, hi, how are you? To a child with special needs that has a hard time with the loss of routine, that they're calling in the morning to greet and just say, hi, how's it going? Thinking about you, and another bedtime call to other children as well. So I thought those were really nice ideas.
Very nice ideas. And I was speaking to a group of kindergarten teachers recently, online of course, and they were saying that the feedback they're getting from the parents about the teacher reading a story to the kids, so that hearing their voice, whether or not they've got visual, because board by board is doing it differently, but hearing the teacher's voice, the kids, that's what they want to come in and hear that story. They love it.
Yeah.
So absolutely, these are relational deposits that are so beneficial for buffering against stressors. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And as educators are thinking about what to plan for their program experiences for children down the road, to think about what's really familiar to that group. What have they always loved? What story, what project, to go back to their pedagogical documentation and look at the projects of last fall or the winter and revisit it with the children, that to get reconnected around what was meaningful to the children and to the group.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. You know, I read quite frequently to our little 2.5-year-old twins, my daughter's 2.5-year-old twins. And, you know, I'll read Owl Moon, and their favorite one is a little, used to be pop-up book of Goldilocks. And that, you know, that predictability of that routine, and, you know, they fill in the last words, or
Yes.
sing songs and they fill in, and I teach them new little rhymes. All of that is building those relational deposits that you're describing, which are so important. So things are familiar to the kids, like you're talking about. So ideas and projects that they've done before, you can go, remember when, remember. We know that's how the brain learns. You know, you hook on to previous knowledge. So that's such great ideas, Lois.
Great. And you'll love this idea. You and I did a learning institute at Boulder Journey School about a year ago. And so we shared with our learning community their example of a social story to reconnect with families and help them and their children to prepare to return to school post-pandemic. And so they had apparently, it appears that they had reached out to families and solicited the children's support in drawing some pictures for the storybook. And they're just key, simple messages about what's going to happen, about, you know, mommy and daddy will wear a mask when they bring you to the school, and I will greet you outside the door, and we'll say goodbye to mom and dad, and we will come in together. And it flows out the day for them around that change of routine. And they've used, as I said, children's drawings and photographs. And we thought it was a really remarkable way to share those messages with families. So it appears as a little slideshow. I'll share it with you. We're going to share it on our website as well for all our participants.
Oh, I love that. You know, so the social story has been used for years. Carol Gray was the first one to talk about it and develop it for children with autism or on the autism spectrum. And so what it does, the brain, we've talked about this, the brain likes predictability. And so if you can predict ahead of time what's going to happen, then you're much more, you know, your limbic system, your fight or flight system is not as activated. If you can prepare kids in that kind of a way, I think it's a brilliant idea, and the kids will play it out as well with their figurines or their Play-Doh or whatever it is.
Right.
I can't wait to see it. I can't wait.
Yeah. It's really quite nice. So again, on connections, there's a question about emotional connections with young learners in kindergarten. And then further to that, a question about new students. Many families will be opting. A lot of the programs are already serving families about their needs or interest in childcare through the summer. And many are opting to not return until September, if it's possible, at that time, if we don't have this second wave. So again, about connecting with students that arrive in September and building up that connection when they may not know you well or recall that much of the program.
Yeah. So I think what is really important, you know how we talked a few minutes ago, Lois, about first of all, making the well-being of staff a priority. I think once that is in place, then it should be really looking about how can I have how can I create the conditions in our center where all of the kids feel safe, where they feel psychologically, emotionally, physically, where they feel safe. And that likely is going to mean that you do have to spend more time slow. So, you know, you're used to integrating new kids into your program, and you do that in a slow, practiced progressive way. What's different now is you know, people are thinking, oh my gosh, I have to introduce everybody, boom at the same time. And I don't think, I'm hoping that as the conversations go on, people are going to be saying, no, we need to do it slowly, because that emotional connectivity that we have with the kids is a baseline, which is setting up their brain to predict how is it going to be here. And so the taking of it slow. So for the kids who are not coming until September, I think if you know they are coming, then it's really important to be reaching out to them over the summer with the ideas that you have already spoken about, that you've so brilliantly outlined, Lois, and that is make the conditions familiar. The situation familiar, and if possible for them to come in and do visits, you know, just as you would do when kids were starting elsewhere. They come in and they do visits and they meet their teacher. I think also that it's important for kids who are coming back to come back to their same teacher at first, to get used to the climate. That's the talking about what we talked about earlier. But for new kids coming in, to expose them beforehand to what the program's all about, what they're going to have fun doing, and finding out from the kids, not just the parents, what it is that they love to do and they're interested and excited about. They're all the things, the conditions that I would be thinking about putting in place as practical as possible. I recognize the challenge for sure.
Yes, yeah. There will be challenges in what staff are available, because some won't have childcare for their own children. And there'll be sort of a combination of children that return and those that don't. And anyway, we'll have to, but you know, what you've just said reminds me that we can do this. We are professional early childhood educators, and we're skilled in relationships. We have strategies that have stood us well over time, having play visits and, a sound orientation process. We may want to build on it, extend it a little more. And as you say, slow it down, but we certainly have the knowledge and the experience to build from. So that's encouraging. There is a question, Jean, about, you mentioned you worry about an increase in anxiety when we return. And what can we do as educators to help curb this? Are there any community resources that may help children and parents and staff?
Right. So first of all, I think many people across the world are concerned about this, even in our littlest ones, that there are going to be more anxious symptoms. I don't know if there's going to be more anxiety disorder, but I think that there is going to be a lot of anxious symptoms. And so it becomes really important then to be knowledgeable about what does anxiety look like in little ones. So in some little ones, it will look like clinginess. In other little ones, it will look like disruptive behavior. And it's really important to understand that the anxiety is coming from stressors that the body is perceiving that something's happening that's threatening. So what does it mean? One, educate yourself about what anxiety looks like in little kids. Secondly, realize that what all kids need is to feel safe, to feel significant, and to feel situated. So that means that you create the environments, you know what they like, you spend time figuring things out with kids. Where do they need that lovely snuggly nook that we talked about with Susan in the first session? What are their needs? And you start being what Stuart Shanker calls a stress detective. And you think about, you observe, you talk to the parents beforehand, and you see and try and figure out, what are the stressors? Is it biological? Is it social? Is it cognitive? Is it emotional? Is it pro-social? Where? And so this is the work of going online and talking, figuring out, getting more information on self-reg, because it's a lovely framework of thinking about And then once you've got an idea of what might be causing the anxiety or the stressor in the little one, then you reframe it. You reframe it. You think it's not misbehavior, but it's stress behavior. And you think, what, you reframe it first, then you see where is the stressor coming from? And then you think about what are some of the ways that you can help modify that stressor. So by being predictable, being the same person who greets that little one every day, and you've got a little routine, because remember, routine and predictability really bring those stressors down. You introduce physical things like maybe some little yoga or breathing, and you can do this with 2.5-year-olds. You know, the looking at the glitter ball and having them just stare at it until it stops, everything falls down. So there are strategies that you can use, and there are people in our community, I'm sure, who have done the foundations course for early childhood and self-reg, and I'd be reaching out to them and see what they've learned about it. And then in the community, most communities have children's mental health centers. And if you don't know which is the Children's Mental Health Center in your community, contact Children's Mental Health Ontario, CMHO, and see which mental health services are available in your community. But I have to be honest with you, one of the first things I would be doing if you think it's beyond the normal is calling up public health. I'd be calling up Healthy Connections in Hamilton, because they have a wealth of information about what might be helpful for kids. Talk to your family physician as well about the issues.
That's really good advice, Jean, and good directions for our Hamilton people. Reminded me that the Merit Center has some great resources on their website that can be helpful in sort of helping to families and educators to determine, you know, what are the stressors, and thinking about and exploring what's the difference between feeling anxious and having an anxiety disorder. And as you say, reaching out if you don't know and need help, reaching out. And that was new to me. I didn't know that our public health had health connections for children's mental health. So we'll be sharing those resources as well.
Sure. Yeah. No. The Healthy Connections, the public health. I've got tons of resources and ways of thinking and making. They know the community really, really well. And so if you've got a little one under 6, they've got lots of ideas.
Okay, that's great. We can also make the connection to the Tools for Life program, which will be, you know, we continue to roll out. It's taken on a new online life that's rich and engaging lots of people, and it's really evolving over this time as well. It's funny what this pandemic has given rise to in terms of online ventures and learning. And the other thing that we have coming at ASCY over the next couple of months, as the summer rolls on, is reaching in, reaching out. And when you were talking about the yoga, I was thinking about some of the breathing exercises, the regulating exercises that are shared as examples in RERO as well. So I'm just going to put a call out. Are there other questions? We're moving into our last 10 minutes. So anything
Wow.
in? Yes, I know it's been an invigorating time.
Wow.
Yes. Trying to think. If there's anything that we might have missed.
Maybe I can talk. Just can I share a little bit of adventure I want to go on, and I'd love for our childhood community to engage in it. So I mentioned Michael Fullan and deep pedagogy, new pedagogies for deep learning.
Yes.
And so what what they talk about is 6 competencies that children, if children and youth develop these competencies through education, then they're going to be engaged with it. They're going to be engaged with it to change the world. So the competencies, I really want to look at it in the early years. So the competencies are things like, I never remember them in order, but communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, citizenship, and one more. And I see the 6 C's as such a big part of what a Reggio philosophy is all about. And so one of the things that I'd really enjoy doing is through ASCY, setting up a conversation. So to, you know, maybe send some material out about the 6 C's, and then just have people's thoughts and ideas about how would you go about creating this. So that, you know, there's a great book, 2 great books, Engage the World to Change the World by Michael Fullan and Joanne Quinn, and Diving Deep into deep learning. But I could probably pull out some stuff, but I think developing those 6 competencies is a huge part of what you guys in early education have been doing for so long. It's being reframed in this way, and it's very exciting to think that we may be able to change the way that education is viewed, to be one of building these character is the 6th one, these competencies in a way that we are creating civic society. Nothing too big to take on, guys, but I would be interested to know if people are interested in that kind of conversation.
I'm seeing in the chat box that yes, they would. And I'm glad you came back to that, Jean, because I really want to take this opportunity to encourage our participants to go to your YouTube channel and view the segments that you have done for new pedagogies for deep learning. And I've just been engrossed with them this last couple of days, and I do see the connection between our early years pedagogy and this work of new pedagogies for deep learning. And you know, I can see our community, our educators really digging into that. Now we have a question: can we repeat the competencies? So
Yep.
if you could repeat the ones that you recall. And
Yep. So communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, I'm writing them down, character, and citizenship.
Okay, I'm typing them in the chat box. Character and citizenship. Pardon my typos, folks. 3, 4, 5, I missed one. Communication, collaboration, critical thinking, character, and citizenship.
And creativity.
Creativity, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. We find that our educators in Hamilton are really looking for ways to deepen their understanding of pedagogy, and that making these connections will be really meaningful to them, I think. Yes, and interesting for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Let's see, let me have a look at questions. What is the Tools for Life online that ASCY offers? That's a question from Mary. Mary, we will get back to you on that. Sue Lepore leads our Tools for Life, and I believe they're just working on some of the module development, and we'll get it to you, okay? If Jean hasn't already spoken to it, I think about educators understanding the notion of emotional contagion. So yes, you have spoken to emotional contagion, and perhaps we can have more discussion with our educators about that setting the climate for the classroom emotionally, and the fact that the children will perceive it. And certainly, you know, most of us know that in our own households, when somebody's having an off day, everybody's going to have an off day if they don't manage it and say, okay, it's just me, I'll get through this.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that, you know, it's all about, we spoke in one of the sessions about emotional intelligence, and I'm loving the work that I'm reading on Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett, and I may be on stage with Mark in sometime in Utah, but that is really looking at recognizing our emotions, understanding where they come from. So he's got a ruler, RULER rubric that helps. So recognizing your emotion, understanding where they come from, labeling them, expressing them, and last is regulating them. So that's the ruler. And so once we become aware, once we give ourselves permission to feel, then we can better recognize and label and then regulate, because you need to name it, to tame it, to claim it, is one of the things that he says, or Dan Siegel says, or somebody says. So that emotional contagion, I think, is something really important. And as we talked about leaders and the role of leaders in this upcoming transition, is going to be hugely important to allow people to have permission to feel, but the strategies for managing and learn to regulate them.
Yeah, so I think, so it's just come to my attention that I was typing to the panelists and not to the participants, but I see my ASCY colleagues have picked up the 6 C's. They are asking whose work is it connected to? It's Dr. Michael Fullan.
Fullan.
And great, thank you. So we have, I can see in the chat box, we have gleaned so many more resources from our conversation tonight that we can share. So as we wrap up, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Jean. This has been well-timed, and you've made such a valuable contribution to the childcare and early years profession. So again, our recordings and our taped video modules are available on Dr. Jean Clinton's YouTube, as well as on the newly established ASCY, Hamilton YouTube channel. So to our participants, as you go forward, we encourage you to dip into these resources with your teams, and for each of you to mindfully note and consider what's come to light or to mind for you, what do you question, and what do you want to learn more about, and importantly, is there one thing that you will commit to in your incredibly important role in parenting or caring for very young children? So once again, Dr. Jean Clinton, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been an exciting time to embark on this online learning journey, and to do it alongside of you has been great for our ASCY team.
Oh, great for me too. Thank you so much, Lois, and the team. Thank you. And be well, everyone. Be well.
Yes, be well. Okay.